Without further ado, Barrett Klein.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you. Can everybody hear me well? Is my voice projecting okay? Yeah? All right. And that eerie insectal electronica that was playing earlier, oh, there it is. 1986 Grem Revel, if you want to look up the insect musicians. But there are others that incorporate insects in their music. So yeah, I've known Peter a long time. And I think you were the only person growing up who tolerated me telling stories from this book I was reading called Killer Bees. So anyway, I'm so appreciative that you brought me to Ann Arbor, a city I love, to talk about things I love, insects. And I'll start with a literal pie chart of life. So if we were to section all of life into a pie, thinking in terms of how many described species of plants are there? How many described species of fungi are there? How many described species of vertebrates, right? By this blue jay's feather. And how many species of the invertebrates are insects? And this moth from Madagascar suggests that it's well over 60% of the species described on the planet. So in ubiquity alone, you think they have to affect our lives. And we'll talk about different ways that insects impact our lives. And we can go way back to the discovery, and this apparently is the oldest known artifact, a fragment of a bison bone. Some say this bison species is extinct now, where an insect is depicted. Can you find it? And can you tell me what group of insect it belongs to? Now, hint, there are 3 partial bird images inscribed by a human thousands of years ago on this bone. So this saltatorial, or jumping, see those big hind legs? Katie did. Some have even attempted to describe it to species. So here's an early artistic association that humans have evidentially with insects. Now, how about our language? Here's an artifact that was excavated in Israel. And I talked with the main person involved in this archaeological effort, and Garfinkel, Josef Garfinkel is his name, and he described what words were inscribed in this comb. And apparently, according to Garfinkel, this is the earliest, most complete sentence in any alphabetical script. And it says, dun, 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 the first sentence in the alphabet? Yep, has to do with insects. This is a louse comb, so it's for nitpicking. It's for scraping out, ideally, all stages of development of those blood-sucking lice. And his response to a journalist was, well, what did you expect? Did you expect a love note or a recipe to make pizza? It is a louse comb, after all, you know. So insects, we have this ancient association with, right? We have them on currency from around the world. I have examples up here if you'd like to look. We've got insects featured in postal stamps from around the world. And I've got that set, and I can describe what's happening with each of these arthropods if you're curious. But because our association with insects is ancient, deep, and complicated, and conflicted at times, we can't dismiss our negative associations. But I'd say they're far outweighed by the positive impacts that we tend to dismiss. So what am I showing here? Oftentimes humans associate insects with annoyance, disturbance, pestilence, disease. And sure enough, this is the most dangerous insect, the most dangerous animal on the planet. Anopheles mosquitoes and others like Aedes aegypti will be vectors of disease like dengue, malaria, yellow fever, and so on. Fleas carry, sometimes, rarely, a bacterium that jump-started, at least initially, the bubonic plague, which halved the population of Europe more than once. Now, it couldn't have spread as quickly if it were by that mechanism alone. It jumped to another, which we can talk about, bacterium. So a lot of associations with disease, but how many species and what is the abundance of those organisms relative to the vast tree that we largely dismiss, ignore, or pay just too little attention to? And I'll start by talking about some of the so-called ecosystem services on which humans depend. I mean, rely on, not only for livelihoods, but our very lives. So here, this is a ground nesting bee, and you'll see these yellow pollen grains dusted on the hairy, seedy-laden structures of bees. We think of bees as being hairy, right? And they evolved with these bifurcating seedae in order to gather pollen to bring back as the protein source, since they're vegetarians, for their brood, versus wasps, largely predators or parasites or parasitoids. Now, we often don't think of this insect, which is not a bee at all, although you'll see them on billboards and the covers of books and mistaking them as honeybees. These are syrphid flies with only one pair of wings, very different heads, very different mouth. I mean, it's obvious, right? But this second most important group of insects as pollinators, flies, are depicted here by an artist's work that is trying to cater to urban dwelling pollinating insects that just need a chance. So when rain falls, it produces sugar water for them in her art pieces. So pollination is huge. One group of scientists has estimated that for every 3 bites we consume, 1 of those bites is due to animal pollinators, and most animal pollinators are insects. But there's far more in terms of ecosystem services on which we rely that insects provide. A huge one is decomposition. And it could be of carcasses, it could be of dung. This is a succession of arthropods that you can predictably predict if there's a carcass about. And the same would go for dung for the most part. So what I tried to do is think about ways of cultural services on top of ecosystem services that insects provide. And my mom illustrated a bunch of it. And my mom is right there. And Elizabeth Jean Younce illustrated some of it. And Elizabeth Jean Younce's original illustrations are here. I'd be happy to talk about those who participated. So there were really hundreds of people who participated in this venture. And the venture is not limited to those hundreds of people. Guaranteed, everyone in this room is impacted professionally, personally, by insects. Sometimes it's really obvious. I'm an entomologist, pretty obvious. Other times it takes a little bit more digging. But you can find those connections beyond what you eat and beyond not being knee-deep in dung and carcasses, right? The first section, the way to begin, at least in my mind, is to think about how we've intersected or how we interrelate with insects, how we use them. How do we exploit insects? And it's largely through their products. And up here, I've got a silkworm moth caterpillar's cocoon that she's produced. So from head-based silk glands, she's spun this very strong, lustrous, mile-long fiber to produce a cocoon within which she can safely develop, and then eclose or emerge as a winged adult. Though the wings do her no good because we've domesticated this one species, Bombyx mori, for millennia to the point where they no longer fly. They're utterly reliant on Homo sapiens. There are only a few species of insects that way. So that started the Silk Road, and there are legends behind the first discovery of silk and exploitation of Bombyx mori. And then, upon penalty of death, China tried to protect this secret, but it leaked to various countries, including Japan. And here is an image of sericulture practice, one of the stages of developing silk. Kazuo Katanaga in Japan, a contemporary artist, produces many giant silk pieces. This is like a cityscape of 110,000 cocoons. And he, with another assistant, every 2 hours would have to flip those crates over and so they disperse evenly. He heat treated them or killed them so that they wouldn't break out and snap that fiber, just as people do in sericulture. Now, there are 180,000 species plus described of Lepidoptera, moths and butterflies. All of them spin silk. That's the one species that we've really capitalized on an industrial scale. Here's another group, cycad moths, and Aki Inomata, also in Japan, produces these haute couture fashion statements where the insects, like this caterpillar, borrows from these designers' dresses to produce their own garments, because cycad moths do collect material, vegetative material, and hang safely from these bags. But you can go beyond. There are a number of orders of arthropods that spin silk. And another, caddisflies. As immatures, they're aquatic. And this really persnickety larva, thanks to Hubert Duprat in France, will collect gold spangles and pearls and rare gems and spin them to form a case. Now, that's not normal. You'll have species-specific sticks or stones forming snail-shaped or other cases. But what Hubert does is he snips the back and pokes them so they wriggle out, takes away their old case, and then supplies them with these jewels to see in a collaboration what kind of art pieces they create. And they really run the show. They make the decision. And then he lets them at close as adults and keeps what they leave behind, these bejeweled cases. Who else spins silk? Non-insects, of course. Spiders are most famous. Think Spider-Man, right? And can anyone tell me what's wrong with this spider, anatomically? And by the way, Steve Ditko's drawings of Spider-Man, woof, problematic. Anybody? Yeah, that's right. Where should those legs go? Yeah, the prosoma, not the episthosoma. Ugh, right? And those are not chelicerae. Those look like mandibles. Come on. But, you know, as an under kimono, it's a beautiful work of art. Now, spider silk, and I'll only show one example, but there's so many crazy, historically amazing examples of how spider silk has been used. But here is the most delicate canvas that I know of ever used by artists. So if you go out and you go to agelennid funnel web spiders' webs or some other spiders' webs, you can delicately clamp and gather it, strengthen it with some milk, clean out or nut juice, and clear out the dead. And what you can do is use that as a canvas on which you can delicately paint. And a certain number of these exist. There are even 6 surviving prints, went through a printing press. So silk is huge. Now we go to Apis mellifera western honeybees, and they've dominated, right? We've spread them around the world. They're the great success story because we've contributed to their great success story in abundance and distribution. And here I took this photo of these parallel combs of wax that they so exquisitely architecture. And what they do is they produce from the undersides of the third segment of their body these glistening scales of wax. They pull it up, they masticate it and heat it up, generating heat in the midsection of the body, and then create these prismatic hexagonal cells. Architects, engineers love this stuff because it's lightweight yet really strong. So you'll see it, yes, in design, but also you'll see it, yes, for engineering purposes, for utilitarian value. But let's think historically, our love and connection is for the honey as well as this wax. And although I write, this is the oldest evidence of beekeeping, these limestone Egyptian inscriptions or bas-reliefs that exist in Berlin right now, with hints of the processing of the honey. This is actually a relatively new story, and we can go back further in time to see cave paintings. Here it might be a little bit hard to see. My friend Gene Kritsky took this photo when he visited a cave outside of Valencia, Spain, and such caves with honey robbing by humans exist primarily in Africa, one small space in India, and scattered around the Iberian Peninsula. And this is the most famous by far. It's appeared on a Spanish stamp and all kinds of things. These are ropes extending up to, some suggest, a woman collecting from a nest. And what I'm doing right now is I'm overlaying from a recorded painting what the interpretation is of not one, but two humans involved with an elaborate rope extension on a cliff face with all these bees, no protection on the body. And a very similar practice is exhibited today. So you can compare note. Well, I was communicating with the authors of a study, very recent study, just a few years ago, with the most elaborate, detailed method with looped rope, again on a cliff face, to rob from bees. Now, we've been robbing for a long time on most continents, and here's an association that I think is the most marvelous with a bird, a wild bird. This is indicator, indicator, the greater honey guide. And is it possible to turn up the volume a little bit? Hear that sound? Yeah, that's fine. Oh, the music? Oh, maybe I should kill that music. Whatever. No, I'll kill it because I'm going to have different music playing. That might get in the way. Hold on 1 second. Sorry, Graham Revell, but I'm turning you off for the nonce. Okay, there we go. So the Yao people, in this case of Mozambique, according to a colleague of mine, Claire Spottiswoode from the UK, call to the birds. And it's culturally specific calls to species-specific birds. And the birds respond by flying close and then leading the human branch by branch, tree to tree, until now a member of the Yao people will see, here's a wild colony of honeybees that I otherwise would have had great difficulty locating myself. Now, indicator, indicator sits by patiently while that human scales the tree or chops it down, pulls out the prize inside, and yes, reciprocated, offers the indicator, indicator greater honey guide a chunk of comb. If you don't do that, will the bird comply next time? No. And Homo sapiens isn't the only species that engages with this bird to find bees. So this individual did a lot of the hard work to access, but would have been far less likely to find the source without the bird. Then we go to another, upon penalty of death, we will not release this secret to the world, product within the body of an insect. And this is cochineal. And I brought a number of cochineal items, including a ball of yarn from Venezuela that's dyed from the bodies of scale insects. And for centuries, nobody knew what these were, these scale bugs that live on the juices within prickly pear cactus pads, Opuntia. And I mean, those in Sonora, Mexico, those, say, the Aztecs and the Maya, who had been domesticating these insects for a millennium, knew full well what they were in terms of insects, because every once in a while, a little flight-worthy male would fly in to mate with something nondescript, like a female blobby scale insect. They're dried out, pulverized, and only a few of these, with a mordant like alum, will create this stunning dye. What Amy Butler Greenfield beautifully wrote as the perfect red. And while there are other sources of organic red, they're difficult to come by, and they may not be as potent and gorgeous as this hue. So people went crazy over it. It was second only to silver when the Spanish conquistadors took over, shipping back tons of these insects in patties to Europe. So you have centuries of artists. Van Gogh is famous for incorporating cochineal dye, even though he knew that it was a fugitive dye, would fade with light. Here is a rare male where you see the wings. Here's a female, blobby. Hard to tell what it is, right? So people thought, is it a worm? Is it a berry? Is it a worm berry? So he actually said that. And behind here, this is just an added bonus. Here, although it's chemically defended, and that's why it's red, here's one organism that actually specializes on feeding it. It's a moth larva. So here's a Van Gogh piece, and all of those he did, the bedroom and Arles, would be different. And you might think, as I did, that it's the red that's different. Actually, the cochineal was in the walls. So these were very differently colored. And contemporary artists will use cochineal. Jennifer Angus in Madison, Wisconsin, a textiles professor, took a whole gallery in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian and coated the walls with cochineal and these geometric arrays of dead insects. And for my mom's and my curated Insect Dreams cabinet, she created a book of cochineal dreams. That's not the only red dye from insects. You can go to lac insects, especially in Thailand and India. And here's stick lac, so lac insects exuding this protective coating under which they can safely crawl until an entrepreneurial human comes by and says, hey, if you can protect yourself with that, maybe I can protect myself or things I value with that. So you can process lac into shellac. And then you've got paper. So inspirational Vespula and Vespa and Dolica vespula wasps and Polistes wasps, paper wasps that will chew up wood and then with their saliva lay layer by layer, forming paper nests. I have a little piece of paper in here from a larger bald-faced hornet nest, create these exquisite architectural feats. And that inspired several, starting with Reaumur in France, to consider our utility imitating insects using wood pulp for paper. Then you can go to poisons and venoms. And yes, there's utility for human medicine. You can cure with insect poisons, or you can kill. And there's a fine balance. If you think about Spanish fly, which is actually from a beetle, Cantherid beetle, that's a toxin, that's a poison. But people for quite a long time have harnessed that for erotic titillation, sometimes to their detriment and doom. Here, a chimpanzee researching organization in Africa have discovered, for the first time not long ago, a chimpanzee troop that was consistently grabbing an insect and kind of biting at it and then rubbing it in an open wound. And not only their own, but others' open wounds. And I was communicating with Tobias to find out more about this. And I said, hey, do you want me to help you identify that insect? He said, on the path. So there should be a paper coming out soon that identifies what this winged insect is. Now, why would that be of interest? Chimpanzees and other non-human animals may have a whole pharmaceutical closet that we have no knowledge of, that we could potentially benefit from. Or you can kill. And there are beetles that the San people in Africa will use with these spears and other sharp devices and just coat them. This one is fully coated with the beetle poison, a toxin. They take the larvae from like a meter below ground. They'll dig these up, and very carefully, you don't want to touch them. Maybe you place them in a giraffe vertebra and you grind it down, and then you swivel your ballistic projectile, right? And that you want to be very wary of because it can even be potent for years. All of this could culminate in something like this. Anybody know what this is? This weird, nondescript, inscrutable thing? This is one of the most important documents in all of history. It's especially important as of late, and it has to do with democracy. So this is one of the Magna Carta. So King John relinquished some of his power because he signed this. Well, he didn't really sign it, but there's like his seal squished. It's now amorphous, a blob. It used to be his face there. This is a burn victim, but this has several animal components. You could look at the biodiversity behind this famous document, or any document. And we can talk about that too. Here, we've got several insects involved. There's silk here, there's beeswax here in the seal. And the very ink, just as with the Declaration of Independence, US Constitution, Beethoven's compositions, some of Da Vinci's drawings, Van Gogh's drawings, are made with a permanent ink that's induced in the tannins of an oak tree by oak gall wasps of a couple of different genera. And what they do is they invade, they lay an egg. The larva physiologically induces a chemical cascade in which the plant builds a defensive gall. And tannins gather. Well, that can be gathered by humans to create these indelible works. You can also look, I'd argue, in any object, like your scarf maybe. But I looked at my sister, who's a luthier, and her viola. And I wanted to think, okay, she didn't sign up to be a luthier and a musician with entomology in mind, but insects permeate her musical compositions left and right. And the very instrument she produces can be affected by multiple species of insects. I'm just featuring 3 here, but there are more, like Bombyx mori silkworm moths, that can be involved. So the very lacquer can be dyed with cochineal extract from those cochineal insects. Sticklac, the shellac that we can derive from them, can coat the back of the neck and other places. Bees not only produce beeswax that can be used to ease the turning of this, but they also produce propolis with a combination of tree resin and other bodily products. And this is a sticky substance that they line the inside of their cavity, like a tree, to fill gaps. Also has antimicrobial agents that we can learn from, benefit from. So sometimes that can coat the inside as if it were the inside of a tree, of the instrument. And the list goes on. These are called bee stings, these points. So from products, let's look at parts, body parts. And traditionally, you'll find all over the world, this happens to be a group in Brazil that uses rhinoceros beetle heads in jewelry. Or one of my favorite discoveries when I went to the Field Museum and these really generous anthropologists and archaeologists took me through and let me look at all the insect-derived artifacts they had. I was thinking, this one doesn't look like much, just a string of beads on tucum fiber, but each one is an ant leg segment. Ant legs. Here's the whole necklace, but I took that close up. Shiny ant legs. And not to be outdone, a group in Papua New Guinea uses beetle leg segments that iridesce. Okay, the most famous insect body part would be wings, especially in art, and Jan Fabre coded the Brussels, Belgium Royal Palace ceiling and to the surprise of the Queen, one chandelier with over 1 million beetles' front wings, those shiny, in this case, iridescent elytra. Now to the whole insect, dead or alive. Insects and arachnids are traditionally eaten around the world. And we can talk about the greater sustainability. If anybody out here has eaten a cow today or a pig today or a chicken today, think twice. If you're not going to be a vegan or a vegetarian, some are promoting the use of a far more sustainable protein source that's full of micronutrients, and that's insects. And I can point out a couple of examples I have here, like these mopane worms from Botswana, which don't look appetizing in this form, but I can guarantee that, for example, culinary works by my friend Joseph Yun, who founds Brooklyn Bugs. He's an ambassador for entomophagy, the eating of insects, for NASA, UN, and all kinds of places. So he's all about, yes, the sustainability aspect, but he, as ambassador, focuses on, hey, they're tasty. Another way to think about whole body insects and how we exploit them. Bioindicators. If you look in streams and gauge the health of the stream, you're going to look at the contents. Who's alive in there? Are there caddisfly larvae, for example, and stonefly larvae? And Cornelia Hesse-Honegger in Zurich, Switzerland, has for decades looked at nearby sites to nuclear power plants and found irradiated mutations of bilaterally asymmetrical true bugs, as well as some other organisms. And so you'll see the scorpion fly, and this hopper, and this stink bug. And in each case, they have malformations, and she claims, and she's collaborated scientifically to further investigate this, that it's the radiation from nuclear power plants or research sites. Then we can think about insects and art again, with the whole body, dead or alive. And Tierney Brocious and I co-authored a paper that looked at human-induced destruction of the living planet and how artists use these insects as muses to convey messages about the harm we're doing. So if we look at some amazing examples, some of my favorites, Tessa Farmer, UK-based artist, sheep in wolf in sheep's clothing. So here's one of her fairies that looks like a little skeleton made of roots of a particular vine species and oftentimes insect wings. Well, this one's donning ant parts as the ants approach. And then Yukinori Yanagi, this is one of his ant farms pieces. He'd made a world flag ant farm. In this case, it's of the Americas. And what he likes to do is he takes harvester ants, a queenless group of harvester ants, and connects all these flags made of colored sands. And what the ants do is they break down the arbitrary political boundaries that we humans have set up as the ants are dispersed across these flags. And I hope the sound is up for this next one, because Catherine Chalmers, New York City-based artist, read carefully what these leafcutter ants say to us. Yep, we rule. And you think about 60 million years of evolution, leafcutter ants have really paved paths that Homo sapiens could only dream of taking. I set this up as a dichotomy of two works by two artists, again, Catherine Chalmers and Panama-based Donna Conlon. So she laced pieces of paper with citrus liquid so leafcutter ants would take them away, and they carried all these flags, including a peace flag. And here's Catherine Chalmers' War, in which she found leafcutter ant colonies battling and pulling each other apart. And I noticed when I set this slide up that right there, this is a phorid, ant-decapitating, humpbacked fly that's going to parasitize this ant. So it puts this new twist on this peace message that I'm going to have to tell Donna Conlon about. Okay, in my book, so I'm not going to spoil it, but if you want to talk about it afterwards, I can spoil it for you. Most, but not all, of these art pieces are thanks to insects. So insects are incorporated or interpreted or involved in some way, but in which ones? And in what way? Answer on the following page.
Is it in that guy's beard?
Oh, that guy's beard? Just look down a little bit at this trompe-l'oeil piece, which is fake frame, and you'll have fake fly. A memento mori, if you want to think about, reflect on death, which was common in art pieces. Should I give another one away? Anyone want to point out another? Question. Who would like to point out one and say, yeah, an insect's involved, and try to guess which insect? Challenge is out there. Scott Meyer.
I'm thinking.
Yeah, think.
Okay, there's something with the ballerina.
Okay. Edgar Degas' work. What is it about this young ballerina? She's not an insect. Well, the original sculpture was made out of beeswax. Lost wax process. That's a silk ribbon. Right? So there's some things there, two different species. Should we do a third? Oh, yeah? All right, tell me when to stop. Yeah?
Would the pharaoh's headdress be inspired by beetles?
Oh, that's good. And that was my assumption, too. I thought Tutankhamun, of course there's going to be a scarab, a sacred scarab beetle, they're ubiquitous in Egyptian history and culture and art, right? Not on this that I've found on the front or back, but good guess. One of the most iconic works of art. And both these symbols of Lower and Upper Nile were also products of the lost wax process. So you take beeswax, you sculpt something, you invest it with something like plaster, and then you pour molten metal to burn out that wax, and now you've got the metal positive, right? And this tragically one of these fell off, or no, the beard fell off, and so just as they would in Egypt, they replaced it with affixing it with wax, beeswax, a common adhesive. Any others?
Whistler's mother.
John Eufinger points out the iconic arrangement in gray and black, number. She may have fleas. She may have head lice. It's true. She may have multiple ectoparasitic species on her body. We can all speculate. But what is she looking at? Everybody always wonders what she's looking at. Well, it's obvious. She's looking right there. And that is one of the butterfly signature symbols, the logo of James Abbott McNeill Whistler, a butterfly. One more, just because it's too tempting. Huh? Huh? Oh. Nope, nothing that I know. So, yeah, sorry. Winged victory of Samothrace? Couldn't figure out anything. Probably something, but that's one of the two that have no insect involvement to my knowledge.
Maybe the bird wings have mites.
Possibly.
You don't like that one?
But mites aren't insects or arachnids, so it's harder for me to really latch on to that. Yeah. And how could insects be involved in Albrecht Dürer's work? Oh, here's one I should point out. What insect involvement here? This is like 80 pounds of maggots. Yeah, and they were differentially fed different colored food and then placed with these color by number separations. Yeah. Gotta love that. And the final example of many examples, could talk all day about this, but one of the biggest that we might not be at the forefront of our minds is this little guy that flies around your rotting banana, a fruit fly, Drosophila melanogaster. But we know more about ourselves, genetically especially, thanks to this animal than any other animal on the planet, including humans. Right? This is a model organism, and we share so much of our DNA that's conserved that we can do tests with mutant lines of fruit flies that we could never do on humans or mice. Time. Well, I have 10 minutes? Holy cats. And then making of insects, right? So I'm going to share examples that are ancient, like Leonardo da Vinci's most complicated flying device was after a dragonfly. We can think origami and the process of folding has inspired all manner of engineering feats, because in an earwig, the unfolding is the most complicated that's ever been described in nature, with this increase of 10 to 17 times the surface area as they unfold. And robots, from Robo-Bee to Water Strider robots, and my favorite, from the mid-1970s, CIA's Insectothopter. First, it was supposed to be a bumblebee, but who can do with that? So there's a guy on the team who is a fan of dragonflies. So they produce, and I don't have the time, but afterwards, if you're really interested, I can tell you the details of how this thing works. Now, it was a flop because all it took was a 5-mile-per-hour crosswind to push it off, but it did fly for 200 meters for 60 seconds. The idea was it was to serve as a fly on the wall. It could fly and record audio, and the technology was actually developed and could operate if it weren't for that crosswind, right? And then you've got these samurai helmets. They became more elaborate when Gunsmoke came to the battlefield, and then more elaborate still during an extended time of peace, where they became more ritualized, ceremonial, and beautiful, and insects were a very common theme. Now, replicating insects, there's a tradition, Jizai Okimono, in Japan, of producing either fictional or actual biological creatures with articulated metal. And Haruo Mitsuta is the one surviving member in Japan who carries on this tradition to beautiful effect. I've created different arthropods around for different museums, and if you're interested in natural history exhibitry and stuff like that, I'd be happy to talk with you. And then there's architecture. There's architecture of insects, and then there's architecture by humans. And some of Eugene Sui's work actually mimics insect architecture or insect bodies. And here I decided to put up his dream of producing a termite tower, the Ultima Tower, that would be 2 miles tall. And the last section of this book is the most challenging, where we can not exploit an insect, not build an insect, but become an insect, right? And so I break this down into a few categories. The first is to fight like an insect. And Muhammad Ali famously would say, I'm going to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. He takes 2 different insects to show the value of the evasive maneuvering of a lepidopteran and then the powerful venom stinging of a hymenopteran. But there's one insect in the history of Kung Fu that has adopted an insect source. And Shon Kim animated from a Kung Fu manual the operation, the execution of this insect style. So watch this closely, and I hope the sound is up, and see if you can detect which insect he's imitating.
他合二为一了吗？这不静了吗？这个哆嗦劲，嚓哆嗦劲。
Did you see it? Which insect? Yeah. Someone want to come up? Huh? Isabella? Want to come up? Come on, Isabella. You know you want to punch me, right? So come on up here. Okay. So come on up here and punch me as hard as you can in the face. Okay? Punch! Fast and hard, punch! Right? Well, then slow and steady. So if I parry that, right, I can grab raptorial foreleg of a mantis and pull, right? And I can do all kinds of other things, right? But this movement, even the stereotypical like leaf mimicking in the wind movement, is adopted by certain styles of mantis-style kung fu. But this raptorial foreleg with the power and the speed of a mantis was adopted by a monk who was defeated time and time again by his brother monk Feng. What Wang Long wanted to do was come up with a new method. So he heard this, now you're a mantis, okay? And you have grabbed with your forelegs a cicada, right? And it's going crazy. You know, the really annoying cacophonous sound. And so Wang Long hears that, comes to the scene, detects that speed and prowess and power, takes that mantis home with him, and then presents a straw and sees that Isabella mantis is able to parry it or strike, and learns from that, adopts that, and then defeats Brother Feng when he comes back from his mission. Thank you, Isabella. All right. And so you have Jet Li, Jackie Chan, and Bruce Lee all studied, at least for a time, mantis-style kung fu. We can dance like an insect. Papua New Guinea, this is a praying mantis hemlout mask. And anybody guess what mask this is in British Columbia? Mosquito. That's right, for a special ceremony. This one? Bumblebee. Also from British Columbia. Butterflies are super popular. The Hopi butterfly dance, Japanese traditional ceremonial butterfly dance. This one, if true, I found this one clip and tried to verify it with anthropologists who work with San people, is called the caterpillar dance. And it may be a coming of age dance for young women. I think it's beautiful because it's a collective dance. All together they form a single organism. And then modern dance, silk garb, butterfly dance, Loie Fuller. Modern to contemporary dance, Paul Taylor's group, and Minako Seiki as insect. And this is one of my favorites. Here you've got Milena Sidorova, and she mimics, and this is, I think, the best performance of an arthropod simulation on a stage I've ever seen, a spider. And I won't show this whole thing, but you can find this on YouTube very easily, and all 89 seconds are very much worth watching. She's powerful. Act acting like an insect. You can see it on the stage, but it's fun to think about how you can learn from social insect colonies' decision-making. Municipal planners and engineers have looked to the efficiency of ant transport, for example. Honeybee Democracy by Tom Seeley examined the efficient use of communication within the nest to actually use with his colleagues as a department chair. And then, of course, you've got Vincent Price and Fly, where people can become flies, right? If you want more participatory, action-packed insect stuff, you can jump in Metamorphosis and all kinds of video games and adopt the identity of insects. Or sounding like an insect. These are fossil cricket wings. And a 165 million year old sound, long extinct, could be resurrected thanks to the traces left in this stone. And so one of my favorite insect imitations is by the Dong people in China. And women will collectively, as a chorus, sing. Cicadas, as male cicadas. And then, let me see if I can get this. Ah, yeah, there we go. Oop, I want to show you this one. Okay, I can't play all 22 plus minutes of Yoko Ono as a fly, but I will go toward the end, and you'll hear her and John Lennon with the guitar playing backwards, which also sounds dipteran. And then there's dress like an insect, whether you're a monarch butterfly in Oaxaca, or Michoacan State, Mexico in a parade, or you're on the catwalk as part of Alexander McQueen's, but through Sarah Burton's Goliath beetle, and that's by my mom too. And then Jane Kim does these migrating monarch murals, and one of them became a shoe magically. But you can take it further and really become an insect, according to Granville or Jenny Angus. Or, like Laurent Gaultier, make the plunge. That's my dream. But which one would I choose, right? Or, like Laurent Serussi, women transforming as hybrids, chimeras. So I try to do my part. And so as a vigilante in the alleys and dark alleys, you might see me with honeybee collaborations where I take a recycled bicycle helmet, I stick it in one of my hives, and they build these beautiful wax combs. And as an aside, I took my advanced copy of Insect Epiphany and I put it with beeswax and stuck it in a hive, so that'll be built next spring with lots of comb. But in the meantime, a colleague of mine stuck my book in her termite colony and they ate it up on the food page, featuring termites. So that's the end of that, but I wanted to show just glimpses in case you're curious. I'm not paid for any of that. My real job is as an insect scientist, so I study sleep behavior and communication oftentimes in honeybees. So if you're interested in entomology and scientific research, especially behavioral research, come talk to me. The black spot? Oh, I'm trying to focus on a follower of a dancer. And if you're curious about that, we could perform a honeybee dance. And right now I'm writing with two colleagues a book about sleep, because much of my work involves sleep biology. And my mom has illustrated that book, so stay tuned a year from now. And for the next 2 days, if you're interested, I'm part of this international consortium. There's an online conference that looks at insect declines, and we're trying to stem the tide of biodiversity declines in our own way. I'm part of an insect perceptions working group. And I want to close on the note that we have a choice. And in my mind, it's a really simple choice of how we engage with insects and how we form personal or professional relationships with insects. So thank you so much. And I hope we have time for questions.
Yeah, I think we have time for some questions.
Great.
And I just wanted to let you know that Book Suite is in the vestibule right there. due to all the snow down south, their shipment of books was delayed, so they had 3 copies in the store and brought it over.
I'll buy them.
And I think there may be only one left at that. Oh, okay. But what Darcy from Book Suite so kindly did is she brought some book plates. And so if you do want Barrett to sign a book for you, he can sign the book plate, and you can buy a book from them, and you can come by their store and pick it up, or they will ship it to you free of charge. We work with them a lot, and they're really wonderful, and we appreciate her going to these lengths to help get this out. But what I'm going to do is, if there are questions, I'd like to hand you the mic, and you can ask Barrett a question. And officially, we're out of time, and we all need to leave the library in 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
So let's go quick.
I know you're not supposed to have a favorite child, but what's your
Oh
favorite
no,
insect?
that's the worst question ever. Oh, my
Okay,
favorite insect,
never
forget
mind.
it. I mean, it depends totally on what you're really interested in. Social behavior, communication, or morphology, or evolutionary history, or communication. There are all kinds of ways you can approach that question. And sometimes the most bizarre and least known can be the most attractive to me, like Embiopteran web spinners. Right? Or Zoraptor and angel insects. Nobody knows anything about those weirdies, right? But I'm drawn to ants, wasps, bees, because there are layers of complexity when sociality hits the scene, where you can address questions about efficiency of, say, a division of labor and achieving a goal as a team. So that really compels me a lot of the time.
I've got a question for you, Barrett. How many times have you been stung by something, and what was the worst one?
More than twice, a variety. There are all kinds of effects on the human condition. I'll mention one. So when I was in Costa Rica, I would hear this noise. I'd go out to a dark outhouse, and I didn't have a flashlight or anything. Around me, I'd hear this. And the third time I went out there, I decided, I got to figure out, what is this? So I took a flashlight, and of course there's spiders that are the size in the outhouse, and trap-jaw ants. So they hold their mandibles, large mandibles, at 180 degrees, and they have trigger hairs. So if they bump into, say Rich Mui is a springtail, if I bump into, at the time, Wolfie Gronenberg calculated this as the fastest motion in all of animals. They would snap, and it's an audible snap. Now, since then, it's fish opening their maw, and that's a way faster motion. Or this termite, so that has asymmetric, that snaps an ant and kills them instantly. There are lots of, I can talk 80 meters per second. I mean, that blows this out of the water. But I took a trap jaw, and I thought, wow, that's really cool. I picked it up and everything. And nothing happened, and clamped, and nothing happened. So I showed my friend once. I said, hey, look at that. You've got to check out this trap giant. Zap! And whether you're stung by a paper wasp, or yellow jacket, or a honeybee, or a bumblebee, it's a different makeup, a different cocktail. So if you're allergic to one, you might not be allergic to another, right? Well, I was particularly sensitive to this trapjaw ant cocktail that entered my circulatory system. And so, my whole arm was, all right. But there are other accounts more numerous, like wasps, and then bees, and that, yeah. So more than twice is your answer.
Well, we're running out of time, so please join me in thanking Barrett Klein again for all his generosity.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks again for having me. And if we have time, I can talk about my mom's art, although she can talk about her art as well. Elizabeth Jean Yount's cultural entomology, or these prize insects that represent an array of not only evolutionary excitement, but cultural relevance as well.
Since Barrett will talk forever, I've got a pen.
That's right.
And if you want to come over, if anyone wants to, has a book that they purchased, they wanted him to sign it, or I'll get Darcy to come in with some book plates and
Let me grab my
thing. Or
pencils.
he's got a better pen, as you can imagine. So you can line up right over here.